What if Jesus walked among us today? Not on clouds, not on thrones, but on cracked sidewalks beneath neon lights. What if he passed unnoticed, ignored by the powerful, judged by the righteous, filmed, mocked, or canceled online? Would we recognize him? Or would we scroll past him? Tonight we imagine Jesus in modern Los Angeles, not to shock you, not to offend you, but to ask one haunting question. If Jesus returned today, would we follow him or fear him? Picture this. It's 7:30 on a Tuesday morning in downtown Los Angeles. The sun hasn't quite burned through the marine layer yet, and the city streets are already alive with the rhythm of modern desperation. Coffee shops filling with people staring at glowing screens. Homeless encampments stirring to life under freeway overpasses. Influencers positioning ring lights for their morning content. Business executives clutching phones like lifelines, already deep into their first conference calls of the day. And somewhere in the middle of all this beautiful chaos, a man walks quietly down Spring Street. He doesn't look like much. Worn jeans, simple shirt, calloused hands that tell stories of real work. No followers trailing behind him, no camera crew, no blue check mark validating his existence. Just a presence that somehow makes the air itself feel different. But here's what's fascinating. In a city where everyone is performing their life for an invisible audience, where authenticity has become just another brand strategy, where spirituality gets packaged into bite-sized content for maximum engagement, this man carries something that can't be commodified, can't be influenced, can't be algorithmically optimized. He carries truth. And that terrifies people more than they're willing to admit. You see, we live in an age where we've convinced ourselves that we want the truth. We share posts about speaking truth to power. We celebrate whistleblowers and truth-tellers. We claim to value honesty and authenticity above all else. But what if I told you that the very truth we claim to seek is the same truth that would completely shatter the comfortable lies we've built our entire civilization upon? What if the message we desperately need to hear is the exact message we're absolutely not ready to receive? Today I want to take you on a journey through modern America with the most controversial figure in human history. Not the sanitized, commercialized, politically weaponized version of Jesus that gets trotted out during election cycles and cultural battles. Not the cosmic vending machine who exists to grant wishes and validate our lifestyle choices. But the radical, uncomfortable, system-disrupting presence who walked the earth 2,000 years ago and whose message is more relevant today than it has ever been. Because here's what most people don't understand about Jesus. He wasn't crucified for being nice. He wasn't killed for telling people to be good to each other. He was executed because he threatened the very foundation of how power operates in this world. He exposed the lies that every empire, every economic system, every social hierarchy depends on to maintain control. And if he walked among us today in our America of endless distractions and manufactured outrage, of influencer culture and corporate spirituality, of performative activism and weaponized religion, he would be just as threatening to the powers that be as he was 2 millennia ago. Maybe more so. Think about it. We live in a society that has turned literally everything into content. Our pain becomes posts. Our relationships become stories. Our spirituality becomes brands. We've created a world where the medium has completely consumed the message, where the packaging matters more than the product, where the performance of virtue has replaced actual virtue. Into this world walks a man who refuses to perform, who won't create content, who speaks in ways that can't be easily quoted, liked, shared, or monetized, who looks at our carefully constructed images and sees straight through to the desperate souls hiding behind them. What would happen? I'll tell you what would happen. The same thing that always happens when authentic truth encounters organized deception, chaos, resistance, and ultimately transformation for those brave enough to receive it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start where Jesus would start. Not in the mega churches or the political rallies or the social media headquarters. Not among the influential or the powerful or the famous. He'd start where he always started, with the forgotten, the broken, the ones society has written off as lost causes. He'd start on Skid Row. Picture him walking through the encampment on San Julian Street at dawn. 50,000 people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County alone. 50,000 human beings that our society has decided are acceptable casualties in the pursuit of profit and progress. 50,000 souls that most of us step over, drive around, or simply pretend don't exist. But he sees them, really sees them. Not as statistics or policy problems or moral failures, but as beloved children who've been crushed by systems designed to extract value rather than nurture life. He sits with Maria, who's been on the streets for 3 years since her medical bankruptcy. He listens to James, a veteran whose PTSD was treated with pills instead of presence. He holds space for Angela, whose mental health crisis became a criminal justice case study instead of a healing journey. And to each of them, he offers something that no government program, no charity organization, no well-meaning volunteer can provide. He offers dignity, not the conditional dignity that comes with getting clean or finding housing or fitting back into society's acceptable categories, but the inherent, unchangeable dignity of being human, of being loved, of mattering. This is where the modern church would get uncomfortable, because Jesus among the homeless doesn't fit neatly into our prosperity gospel narratives. It challenges our assumption that suffering is always the result of poor choices or lack of faith. It forces us to confront the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the systems we've built and blessed are fundamentally unjust. Can you imagine the think pieces, the hot takes, the theological debates about enabling versus empowering, the careful parsing of his words to make sure they don't threaten the comfortable relationship between Christianity and capitalism? But Jesus isn't interested in our theological frameworks. He's interested in people. Real people with real pain in a really broken world. From Skid Row, he might walk to Hollywood. Not to the studios or the red carpets or the influencer houses in the hills, but to the ordinary people living extraordinary desperation behind Instagram-perfect facades. The aspiring actors working 3 gigs to afford a studio apartment they share with 2 roommates. The content creators whose entire sense of self-worth depends on algorithmic validation from strangers. The young people who've been taught that their value is measured in followers, likes, and engagement metrics. Here, his message would cut even deeper. Because in a culture that has weaponized comparison and monetized insecurity, that has turned every human interaction into a potential content opportunity, Jesus would offer something revolutionary. He'd offer the radical possibility of being loved for who you are, not what you achieve. Of being valued for your existence, not your productivity. Of being worthy simply because you breathe. Imagine him sitting in a coffee shop on Sunset Boulevard talking to Emma, a 23-year-old who's built a following of 200,000 people by documenting her fitness journey. She's never told anyone about the eating disorder that drives her workout obsession, or the anxiety that keeps her awake at night wondering if she's inspired anyone or just made them feel worse about themselves. She's never admitted that the highlight reel she shares has become a prison she can't escape from. What would Jesus say to her? Would he condemn social media? Would he tell her to delete her accounts and retreat from the digital world? Or would he offer something more nuanced, more challenging, more transformative? He might ask her a simple question. What would happen if you loved yourself the way I love you? Not as a brand, not as content, not as an inspiration or a cautionary tale, but as a human being deserving of grace, rest, and authentic connection. This is the message no one is ready to hear. That you don't have to perform your worth. That your value isn't tied to your output. That in a world obsessed with becoming, you're already beloved exactly as you are. From Hollywood, he might drive to Orange County, to the mega churches with their stadium seating and professional lighting and carefully crafted weekend experiences. To the congregations that have turned faith into a lifestyle brand and worship into entertainment. To the pastors who've built empires on the promise that God wants you to be rich, successful, and perpetually happy. And here his presence would be most threatening of all. Because modern American Christianity has made peace with power in ways that would be unrecognizable to the man who said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. He'd walk into these spaces not with condemnation, but with the kind of love that exposes everything that isn't love. He'd see the genuine faith of people desperate for hope. He'd see the sincere hearts of those who really do want to follow him. But he'd also see how that desire has been captured, packaged, and sold back to them in ways that keep them comfortable rather than transformed. The prosperity gospel would crumble under his gaze, not because he's opposed to blessing or abundance, but because he knows that the pursuit of personal benefit as the primary motivation for faith creates consumers rather than disciples, customers rather than followers, fans rather than friends. This is where we need to pause and ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. If Jesus showed up today, not as the figure we've created in our own image, but as the radical presence he actually was, would we recognize him? Would we listen to him? Or would we do what every generation has done when confronted with truth that challenges their comfortable assumptions? Would we find reasons to dismiss him, discredit him, or destroy him? Because the message he'd bring wouldn't fit neatly into our political categories. It wouldn't support our economic systems. It wouldn't validate our cultural assumptions. It would challenge everything we think we know about success, security, and significance. And that's exactly why we need to hear it. But before we go deeper into what that message might sound like, we need to understand something crucial about the world Jesus would be walking into. This isn't the same world he encountered 2,000 years ago. This is a world that has been shaped by 2 millennia of people claiming to follow him while often doing the exact opposite of what he taught. This is a world where his name has been used to justify wars, oppression, and exploitation, where his message of radical love has been twisted into tools of control and exclusion, where the very institutions that claim to represent him have often become the exact kind of religious political power structures he spent his life confronting. Into this world of complex history and competing narratives, Jesus would bring not answers that fit our existing frameworks, but questions that shatter them entirely. He might start by asking the influencers filming their morning routines, "Who are you?" when the camera stops rolling. He'd sit with the venture capitalists orchestrating their third IPO and wonder aloud, what profit is there if you gain the whole market but lose your soul? He'd watch the political rallies where his name gets weaponized for power and ask, do you love your enemies, or do you just love the idea of having enemies to define yourself against? These aren't rhetorical questions, these are invitations to a different way of being human. But they're invitations that require us to give up the very things we've convinced ourselves we need to survive in modern America. Let me paint you another picture. Jesus walking through the financial district in downtown LA. Past the gleaming towers where algorithms trade billions of dollars in microseconds. Past the homeless camps that exist in the literal shadows of unprecedented wealth. Past the coffee shops where startup founders pitch world-changing ideas while stepping over people who need their world changed right now. He'd see it all. The breathtaking innovation and the heartbreaking inequality. The incredible potential and the devastating waste. The boundless creativity and the crushing loneliness. And he wouldn't offer simple solutions or easy answers. He'd offer something far more dangerous. He'd offer transformation. Not the kind of transformation that gets packaged into 12-week courses or motivational seminars. Not the kind that promises to optimize your life or maximize your potential or unlock your best self. The kind of transformation that requires you to die to everything you thought you needed to be happy. This is where the rubber meets the road in our comfortable Christianity. Because we've created a version of faith that's designed to make us feel better about the lives we're already living rather than calling us to live completely different lives. We want Jesus to bless our ambitions, not redirect them. We want him to comfort our anxieties, not challenge their source. We want him to fit into our schedules, not overturn our priorities. We want him to be our co-pilot, not our Lord. But what if he won't play that game? Picture him in Silicon Valley, walking through the campuses where brilliant minds work 80-hour weeks building platforms that connect the world while disconnecting from their own humanity. Where the promise of bringing people together has created more isolation than connection. Where the tools designed to democratize information have become weapons of mass distraction. He'd see the 25-year-old engineers making more money than most people dream of. Living in pods because housing costs have been driven beyond reach by the very wealth their innovations created. He'd see the executives whose apps track every metric of human behavior except the ones that actually matter. He'd see the venture capitalists funding solutions to problems their previous investments created. And he wouldn't condemn the technology. He'd see the genuine desire to make the world better. He'd recognize the beautiful human impulse to create, to connect, to solve problems. But he'd also see how that impulse has been captured by systems that turn everything, even love itself, into data points and profit margins. His questions here would be surgical. You've connected billions of people to information. Have you connected them to wisdom? You've built platforms for sharing. Have you built spaces for solitude? You've optimized for engagement. Have you optimized for peace? The answers would be uncomfortable. Because we've created a world where the metrics we measure aren't the things that matter most, where success is defined by growth rather than flourishing, where innovation serves efficiency rather than humanity. This isn't about being anti-technology or anti-progress. It's about asking what progress actually means. Progress toward what? Innovation for whom? Connection to what end? Jesus wouldn't offer a Luddite manifesto. He'd offer something more challenging. The possibility of using our incredible tools in service of love rather than in service of systems that extract value from human attention and emotion. But here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Because the same questions he'd ask Silicon Valley, he'd ask the church. Imagine him walking into one of those massive weekend services. 10,000 people in stadium seating, professional musicians, state-of-the-art lighting, sermons crafted by teams of writers and tested on focus groups, the kind of production that rivals anything Hollywood creates. He'd see the genuine hunger for meaning in the faces of the congregation. He'd see people desperate for community in an isolating world. He'd see hearts genuinely seeking connection with the divine. And he'd love them deeply. But he'd also see how that hunger has been commodified. How the genuine spiritual yearning has been packaged into a consumer experience. How the radical message of transformation has been sanitized into self-help with religious language. The questions here would cut deepest of all. You've built impressive buildings. Have you built the kingdom? You've grown large congregations. Have you grown disciples? You've perfected the performance. Have you practiced the presence? This is where the modern church would face its greatest crisis. Because Jesus among us today would force us to confront the gap between what we profess and what we practice. Not with judgment, but with love so pure it exposes everything that isn't love. He'd see pastors who genuinely love God but have been seduced by the metrics of modern ministry. Growth charts and budget projections and social media engagement rates. He'd see congregants who sincerely want to follow him, but have been taught that following means consuming religious content rather than being transformed by divine presence. The uncomfortable truth is that we've created a Christianity that's designed to be palatable to the very systems Jesus came to challenge. We've made peace with empire. We've blessed inequality. We've turned the gospel of liberation into a product for purchase. But what would Jesus do in response? Would he overturn the tables like he did in the temple? Would he pronounce judgment like the prophets of old? Would he withdraw in disgust from the corruption of his message? I think he'd do something far more radical, something that would challenge not just the systems but our very understanding of how change happens. He'd love, not the sentimental, enabling kind of love that makes everyone feel good about their choices, but the fierce, transformative kind of love that refuses to let people settle for less than they were created for. The kind of love that sees through our masks and defenses to the eternal soul underneath. The kind of love that believes in our capacity for transformation even when we've given up on ourselves. This love would be expressed not in grand gestures or viral moments, but in the quiet, persistent presence that meets people exactly where they are while refusing to leave them there. He might spend an afternoon with Sarah, a marketing executive in Beverly Hills who's built her entire identity around her ability to manufacture desire for things people don't need. She's incredibly successful by every conventional measure, but she lies awake at night wondering if her life has any meaning beyond creating consumer demand for products that end up in landfills. Jesus wouldn't lecture her about the evils of capitalism or the shallowness of consumer culture. He'd simply ask, "What do you really want to create?" And in that question, she'd glimpse the possibility of using her considerable talents in service of something that actually matters. Or take Marcus, a social media influencer who started posting fitness content to help people get healthy, but gradually realized his platform was making more people feel worse about their bodies than better. He's trapped between his genuine desire to inspire and the algorithmic demands for increasingly extreme content. Jesus might ask him, what would it look like to influence people toward love instead of comparison? And suddenly, Marcus would see possibilities he'd never considered. Ways to use his reach to build people up rather than tear them down. Ways to redefine strength and beauty and success in terms that actually serve human flourishing. These aren't dramatic conversion moments. They're gentle invitations to see differently, to love differently, to live differently. But their cumulative effect would be revolutionary. Because this is how the kingdom of God actually advances. Not through political power or cultural dominance or institutional control, but through individual hearts being transformed by love and then living that transformation in ways that transform others. It's quiet. It's gradual. It's often invisible to the metrics we use to measure success, but it's unstoppable. The question is, would we recognize it? Would we value it? Or have we become so addicted to the spectacular, the viral, the immediately impactful, that we'd miss the gentle revolution happening right in front of us? This is the message no one is ready to hear. That the transformation our world desperately needs won't come through the channels we expect. It won't be televised or tweeted or turned into content. It will happen in coffee shop conversations and late-night phone calls and quiet moments of individual choice. It will happen when people encounter love so authentic, so transformative, so completely different from everything they've experienced that they can't help but be changed by it. And that love has a name. It has a face. It has nail-scarred hands and eyes that see straight through to the soul. The only question is, are we ready to let it change us? But here's where the story takes a turn that would make everyone uncomfortable. Because as this quiet revolution of love begins to spread through individual hearts, as people start living differently, choosing differently, loving differently, it inevitably collides with the systems that depend on them staying exactly as they were. The algorithms notice first. Sarah, the marketing executive, starts creating campaigns that actually help people rather than manipulate them. Her click-through rates plummet. Her conversion metrics crash. The AI system that determine her company's advertising spend flag her work as ineffective. Her boss calls her in for a performance review. Marcus, the fitness influencer, begins posting content about rest, about self-acceptance, about finding worth beyond physical appearance. His engagement drops by 60%. The supplement companies pull their sponsorship deals. The platform's algorithm stops promoting his videos because they don't generate the kind of emotional intensity that keeps people scrolling. These aren't abstract consequences. These are people's livelihoods, their identities, their sense of security in the world. And suddenly they're faced with a choice that feels impossible. Continue participating in systems that contradict their deepest values, or risk everything they've built for the sake of integrity. This is where Jesus' presence becomes most revolutionary, because he doesn't offer them a third option or an easier path. He simply offers presence. The kind of presence that makes it possible to choose love even when love costs everything. Imagine him sitting with Sarah as she stares at her laptop screen, cursor blinking in an empty email draft to her boss. She's trying to find words to explain why she can't continue creating campaigns that prey on people's insecurities. But how do you explain a transformation that doesn't fit into quarterly reports or business objectives? He doesn't give her the words. Instead, he gives her something far more valuable: the unshakable knowing that she is loved regardless of what she produces, regardless of how much money she makes, regardless of whether she succeeds or fails by the world's standards. And from that knowing, the words come. Not perfect words, not words that will make everyone happy, but true words. Words that honor both her humanity and her employers. Words that open possibilities she couldn't see when she was trapped in fear. Or picture him with Marcus, who's sitting in his empty apartment after losing his biggest sponsorship deal. The silence feels deafening after years of constant content creation, constant performance, constant validation from strangers on the internet. For the first time in years, Marcus is alone with himself, and he's terrified by what he might find. Jesus doesn't fill the silence with encouragement or motivation or strategic advice about rebuilding his platform. He simply sits in the silence with him. And in that shared stillness, Marcus begins to remember who he was before he became a brand. He begins to glimpse who he might become if he stopped performing and started being. This is the pattern that would emerge wherever Jesus walked in modern America. Not dramatic healings or supernatural interventions, but the quiet restoration of people to themselves. The gentle remembering of what it means to be human in a world that is forgotten. But the systems wouldn't stay quiet for long. Picture the board meeting at Sarah's advertising agency. The executives are reviewing quarterly numbers, and her department's performance is dragging down the entire division. The conversation isn't about ethics or meaning or human flourishing. It's about shareholder value and competitive advantage and market positioning. "We need to let Sarah go," someone says, and there are nods around the polished conference table. Her recent work just isn't hitting the metrics we need. They're not evil people. They're trapped in a system that measures success in ways that have nothing to do with actual human well-being. They genuinely believe they're making rational business decisions. But what they're actually doing is enforcing conformity to a machine that consumes souls for profit. The same pattern would play out across every sector where authentic transformation began to emerge. The tech companies would notice that their most talented engineers were asking uncomfortable questions about the social impact of their products. The entertainment industry would see creators turning down projects that glorified violence or normalized dysfunction. The financial sector would watch as their most successful traders began to question whether moving money around in increasingly complex ways actually created any value for real people. And in each case, the response would be predictable. Not persecution exactly, not dramatic oppression, just the quiet, systematic pressure that every empire uses to maintain control. The withdrawal of resources, the limitation of opportunities, the social and economic isolation of anyone who refuses to play by the rules. This is how crucifixion works in modern America. Not with nails and crosses, but with credit scores and career prospects. Not with Roman soldiers, but with algorithmic enforcement of conformity. Not with physical death, but with the slow strangulation of alternatives to the systems that are killing us. But here's what the powers that be wouldn't understand about the kind of revolution Jesus would spark. You can't kill love with economic pressure. You can't crush hope with social isolation. You can't algorithm away the human soul's desperate hunger for meaning. Every person who encounters authentic love becomes a carrier of that love. Every heart that experiences genuine transformation becomes a source of transformation for others. Every life that discovers its worth beyond productivity becomes a testament to possibilities that no system can contain. Picture Maria from Skid Row 6 months after that first conversation with Jesus. She's still homeless. The housing crisis in Los Angeles hasn't magically resolved. The mental health system hasn't suddenly become compassionate and effective. The economic forces that created her situation haven't disappeared. But something fundamental has shifted. She no longer sees herself through the eyes of a society that treats her as disposable. She knows she matters, not because of what she might accomplish or how she might recover or what services she might access, but because she exists, because she breathes, because she is beloved, and that knowing changes everything. She starts looking out for other people in the encampment differently. Not as competition for scarce resources, but as fellow souls deserving of dignity. She shares her food even when she doesn't have enough. She listens to their stories even when she's drowning in her own pain. She offers hope even when her circumstances haven't changed. The social workers notice. There's something different about the dynamic around Maria's tent. Less conflict, more cooperation, a sense of community that their training manuals never taught them how to create. They start asking her advice about how to help other people. Maria doesn't have professional credentials or academic degrees. She doesn't speak the language of social services or policy intervention. But she has something more valuable. She knows what it feels like to be truly seen, and she's learned how to see others the same way. This is how the kingdom spreads. not through institutional programs or governmental initiatives, but through the quiet contagion of love lived out in daily choices. Through people who have been transformed by grace, learning to offer that same grace to others. Now multiply that by every life Jesus would touch. Emma, the social media fitness influencer, starts using her platform to share real struggles alongside highlight reels. Her follower count drops, but her direct messages fill with people thanking her for helping them feel less alone. Some of those people start sharing their own authentic stories. The ripple effect spreads through networks the algorithm can't track. James, the veteran from Skid Row, finds his way into a job at a non-profit that helps other veterans navigate the maze of services available to them. He doesn't have the traditional qualifications, but he has something more important. He understands. His presence in that office changes the entire culture. Other staff members start seeing their clients differently. The organization's outcomes improve in ways that can't be measured but can definitely be felt. Angela, whose mental health crisis was criminalized instead of treated, eventually becomes an advocate for reform in the system that failed her. She doesn't have law degrees or policy expertise, but she has lived experience and a voice that refuses to be silenced. Her testimony before city council meetings carries a weight that no expert analysis can match. Each of these transformations seems small, individual, almost insignificant against the massive scale of systemic problems. But that's exactly what makes them so powerful. They can't be co-opted by political machines or captured by corporate interests or contained by institutional boundaries. Love lived out in individual choices creates realities that no amount of money or power can control. But the resistance would intensify as the movement grew. Not from any single source, but from every system that depends on people remaining isolated, distracted, and desperate enough to accept exploitation as normal. The entertainment industry would produce more content designed to numb and distract. The advertising world would develop more sophisticated techniques for manufacturing dissatisfaction. The technology sector would create more addictive platforms to capture human attention. The political system would generate more outrage to keep people too angry to think clearly. It wouldn't be coordinated conspiracy. It would be the natural immune response of systems threatened by the possibility of human flourishing. And in the middle of all this escalating tension between love and power, between transformation and control, between the kingdom of God and the empires of earth, Jesus would continue walking quietly through the streets of Los Angeles. He'd be with the day laborers gathering at dawn outside Home Depot, hoping for work that might feed their families. He'd sit with the nurses working double shifts because the hospital won't hire enough staff to provide safe care. He'd listen to the teachers spending their own money on supplies because the system has decided education isn't worth funding properly. To each of them, he'd offer the same impossible gift, the assurance that their value doesn't depend on their productivity. Their worth doesn't fluctuate with market forces. Their dignity can't be taken away by systems that treat them as disposable. And slowly, quietly, persistently, that assurance would begin to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. not through grand gestures or viral moments, but through the accumulated weight of people who refuse to see themselves or others as anything less than beloved. This is the message no one is ready to hear. That the revolution our world desperately needs won't look like revolution at all. It will look like love. Quiet, persistent, transformative love that refuses to accept that things have to be the way they are. It will look like people choosing connection over isolation, presence over performance, being over becoming. It will look like individuals discovering their worth beyond what they produce and then living in ways that honor the worth of others. And it will be unstoppable. Not because it overpowers opposition, but because it transforms opposition. Not because it defeats enemies, but because it turns enemies into friends. Not because it conquers systems, but because it offers people something worth more than what those systems promise. The question isn't whether this kind of transformation is possible. Human history is full of moments when love proved stronger than power, when truth outlasted lies, when hope survived seemingly hopeless circumstances. The question is whether we're ready to participate in that transformation, whether we're willing to let go of the comfortable lies we've built our lives around, and embrace the uncomfortable truth that we were created for something far more beautiful than what we've settled for. Whether we're brave enough to recognize Jesus when he shows up not as we expect him, but as he actually is. The quiet presence walking among the forgotten, offering love that costs everything and gives everything in return. The choice is ours. It always has been. And it always will be. But time is running short. The systems that are crushing human souls are accelerating. The technologies that could liberate us are being used to enslave us. The platforms that could connect us are being weaponized to divide us. The abundance that could feed everyone is being hoarded by the few while the many go hungry. We're standing at a crossroads. One path leads deeper into the darkness we've created. The other leads toward the light we've always been meant to walk in. And somewhere on the streets of Los Angeles, a man with calloused hands and eyes full of love is still walking, still waiting, still offering the invitation that could change everything. The only question left is, will we finally be ready to hear what he's been trying to tell us all along? The message would come not as a sermon from a stage, not as a viral video crafted for maximum engagement, not as a book deal or a speaking tour or a movement with branded merchandise. It would come the way truth has always come to a world too distracted to listen. Quietly. Personally, one conversation at a time. Picture him now in Venice Beach, where the boardwalk thrums with the beautiful chaos of human desperation dressed up as entertainment. Street performers compete for tourist dollars while actual artists sleep in doorways. Vendors sell crystals and sage to spiritual seekers who've confused consumption with enlightenment. Tech bros in Teslas cruise past homeless camps, windows up, music loud enough to drown out the cognitive dissonance. He sits on a bench facing the ocean, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of hope and warning. The waves crash with ancient rhythm, indifferent to human ambition, untouchable by algorithmic manipulation. Here in the space between land and sea, between what is and what could be, people find him. Not because he calls attention to himself, Not because he performs miracles or promises solutions or offers the kind of inspiration that gets packaged into motivational content, but because something in his presence creates space for honesty in a world that's forgotten what honesty feels like. Rebecca approaches first. She's been walking the beach for hours, phone in hand, but for once not filming herself. 28 years old, 500,000 TikTok followers, and absolutely no idea who she is when the camera stops rolling. She's built her entire identity around being relatable, authentic, real. But the performance of authenticity has become another kind of prison. She doesn't know why she sits down next to this stranger. Something about the way he watches the waves, like he's seeing them for the first time. Like he has all the time in the world. "I've been thinking about deleting everything," she says without preamble. It's the first time she's said it out loud. The first time she's admitted that the thing that made her famous is slowly killing her soul. He doesn't immediately respond with advice or encouragement or the kind of spiritual platitudes that usually fill awkward silences. He just nods, like he understands, like he's been waiting for her to say it. "What would happen if you did?" he asks eventually. Not pushing, not leading, just curious about her truth. "I don't know," she admits. "I don't remember who I was before all this. I don't know if there's anything left under all the content." "There is," he says simply. "There always is. It's not a profound statement. It's not the kind of wisdom that gets quoted or shared or turned into inspirational graphics. But something in the way he says it, something in the certainty that comes from a place deeper than opinion, makes her believe it might be true." They sit in silence as the sun disappears into the Pacific. Other people begin to gather, not drawn by any announcement or invitation, but by the same inexplicable pull that brought Rebecca. A maintenance worker finishing his shift. A college student who's been walking the beach since her third panic attack this week. An elderly man whose wife died 6 months ago and who hasn't spoken to another human being in days. Nobody introduces themselves. Nobody explains why they're there. They just sit in the gathering darkness, listening to waves that have been crashing long before social media existed and will continue long after the last server shuts down. This is where the kingdom of God lives. Not in the dramatic moments that make good stories, but in the quiet spaces between words where souls recognize each other, where the desperate performance of modern life gives way to simple presence. An hour passes, maybe 2. People come and go. Some stay for minutes, others for the entire evening. No one speaks much, but everyone leaves different than they came. Rebecca deletes her apps before she gets home. Not in a dramatic gesture of liberation that she documents for content, but in a quiet moment of choosing herself over the machine that's been feeding on her attention. She doesn't know what comes next, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty feels like possibility rather than terror. The college student calls her mom. They haven't spoken in months, not since the fight about tuition and expectations and the crushing weight of trying to build a future in a world that seems determined to steal it from her generation. The conversation is awkward at first, then healing in ways that can't be measured in engagement metrics. The maintenance worker stops at the grocery store and buys ingredients for a real meal. He's been living on energy drinks and vending machine food for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to care for his body. But something about the evening reminded him that he matters, that his life has value beyond his productivity. The elderly man doesn't call anyone. He doesn't have anyone left to call. But he goes home and waters the plants his wife loved, the ones he'd been letting die because tending them without her felt too painful. Tonight it feels like love. These aren't miracles in the traditional sense. No one's sickness is healed. No impossible circumstances are changed. No dead are raised to life. But something more subtle and perhaps more powerful happens. People remember who they are underneath all the noise. They reconnect with desires that can't be monetized and worth that can't be measured. This is the message no one is ready to hear because it requires giving up the very things we've been taught to believe we need. It requires letting go of the constant performance, the endless optimization, the desperate attempt to matter in a world that has turned attention into currency and human beings into content creators. The message is this: you already matter, not because of what you achieve or accumulate or accomplish, not because of your influence or your impact or your ability to inspire others. You matter because you exist, because you breathe. Because you are a unique expression of love in a universe that desperately needs exactly what you have to offer. But here's the uncomfortable part. If you actually believed that, if you actually lived from that knowing, it would change everything about how you move through the world. You couldn't participate in systems that treat people as disposable. You couldn't remain silent in the face of suffering. You couldn't prioritize profit over human flourishing. You'd have to love, really love. Not the sanitized, selective kind of love that feels safe and manageable, but the fierce, transformative kind that sees the divine in every person, especially the ones society has written off. Picture Jesus now in downtown LA, walking through the corridors of power where decisions get made that affect millions of lives. Not the elected officials who perform leadership for cameras, but the real power brokers who prefer to remain invisible. The hedge fund managers who buy up housing to flip for profit while families live in cars. The pharmaceutical executives who price medications out of reach of people who need them to survive. The tech leaders who design platforms to capture and monetize human attention regardless of the psychological cost. He doesn't condemn them. That's what we would do. That's what our justice-hungry hearts demand. But condemnation only strengthens the very systems it claims to oppose. It feeds the cycle of us versus them thinking that keeps everyone trapped in roles that diminish their humanity. Instead, he sees them, really sees them, past the justifications in the quarterly reports and the carefully constructed narratives that allow them to sleep at night. He sees the frightened children underneath the power suits. The souls who learned early that worth comes from winning. That security requires domination. That love is conditional on performance. He sees how the same systems that are crushing the poor are also crushing the people who think they're benefiting from them. How the executives making millions of dollars are just as trapped as the workers they exploit. Just in golden cages instead of cardboard boxes. This perspective doesn't excuse the harm they cause, but it opens possibilities for transformation that pure opposition never could. Because when people encounter love that sees through their defenses to their deepest truth, when they experience acceptance that doesn't depend on their achievements, when they feel valued for who they are rather than what they control, something breaks open that no amount of argument or activism could crack. David Chen sits in his corner office 60 floors above the city, looking down at traffic patterns that look like blood cells moving through arteries. He's the CFO of a private equity firm that specializes in buying struggling hospitals, cutting staff and services to maximize profit, then selling them to the next buyer. It's perfectly legal. It generates excellent returns for investors. And it's slowly killing the communities those hospitals used to serve. He tells himself he's just responding to market forces, that he's creating efficiency in a bloated system, that the invisible hand of capitalism will somehow sort out the negative externalities. But late at night, when the office is empty and the city lights blur together like stars, he wonders what happened to the kid who wanted to be a doctor because he thought he could help people. The knock on his office door comes after midnight. Security should have cleared the building hours ago, but somehow this man made it through all the locked doors and keycard readers and surveillance systems. He doesn't look threatening, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying other people's pain. "I wanted to see where the decisions get made," the man says simply. David should call security, should demand identification, should exercise the power that his position in the hierarchy grants him. Instead, he finds himself inviting the stranger to sit down. They talk until dawn, not about policy or profits or the complex financial instruments that turn human suffering into shareholder value. They talk about David's father, who worked 3 jobs to pay for medical school, about his daughter who's studying to be a nurse because she wants to help people, about the dreams that got buried under spreadsheets and quarterly targets and the relentless pressure to deliver results that look good on paper but feel terrible in the soul. The stranger doesn't offer solutions or demand changes or threaten consequences. He just listens. And in being truly heard, perhaps for the first time in decades, David begins to remember who he used to be before the system shaped him into what it needed him to become. The conversation ends when the sun rises over the city. David never learns the stranger's name, but something fundamental has shifted. Not a dramatic conversion or a sudden change of career, but a crack in the foundation of assumptions that have governed his choices for 20 years. Within a month, he's asking different questions in board meetings. What's the human impact of this decision? Who benefits and who pays the cost? How can we create value without destroying communities? His colleagues think he's having a midlife crisis. The shareholders worry he's gone soft. But the small changes he begins implementing, the slightly different metrics he starts tracking, the marginally more humane policies he advocates for, they add up. One hospital gets to keep its emergency room open. One community health center receives funding instead of being shuttered. One group of nurses doesn't get laid off right before Christmas. Small victories in the face of systemic problems, but each one represents lives saved, families kept together, hope preserved in places where hope was being methodically eliminated. This is how the kingdom advances in the corridors of power. not through revolutionary overthrow or dramatic confrontation, but through the quiet transformation of individuals who remember their humanity and begin making choices from that remembering. But the resistance grows stronger as the movement spreads. Not from any single source, but from every system that depends on people remaining disconnected from their own worth and each other's dignity. The media creates more outrage to keep people distracted from their deeper hunger. The entertainment industry produces more content designed to numb rather than awaken. The technology platforms deploy more sophisticated algorithms to capture attention and monetize anxiety. The political system generates more division to prevent the kind of unity that might threaten existing power structures. It's not conscious conspiracy. It's the natural immune response of systems that evolved to extract value from human beings rather than serve them. Like antibodies attacking foreign tissue, these systems instinctively resist anything that might restore people to their full humanity. The pressure intensifies on those who've begun to change. Rebecca, the former influencer, finds her savings dwindling as sponsorship opportunities dry up. Her friends, still trapped in the content creation cycle, begin to distance themselves. She represents something they're not ready to face about their own lives. Sarah, the marketing executive, faces increasing pressure at work as her campaigns prioritize human well-being over manipulation. Her boss schedules performance reviews. Her colleagues whisper about her lack of focus on results. The company culture built around extracting maximum value from consumer psychology has no category for what she's trying to do. Marcus, the fitness influencer, watches his engagement metrics plummet as he shares content about rest and self-acceptance instead of transformation and optimization. The algorithm that once boosted his reach now treats his posts as irrelevant. Supplement companies cancel their contracts. The financial foundation of his life begins to crumble. Each of them faces a choice that feels impossible. Return to participating in systems that contradict their deepest values, or risk losing everything they've built for the sake of integrity. This is where faith becomes practical. Not faith in abstract doctrines or distant promises, but faith in the possibility that choosing love over fear, truth over comfort, presence over performance might actually lead somewhere worth going. It's the kind of faith that can only be lived, never argued. The kind that reveals itself not in what people say they believe, but in what they're willing to sacrifice for what they believe. And in coffee shops and community centers, in parks and parking lots, in the quiet spaces where real conversations happen, that faith begins to spread. Not through preaching or evangelism or organized campaigns, but through the simple contagion of people who've discovered something worth more than what the world is selling. They gather in small groups, not churches exactly, not support groups, not political organizations, but something new. Communities of practice around the radical proposition that human beings were created for more than consumption and production. That love is more powerful than fear. That transformation is possible even in circumstances that seem hopeless. These gatherings don't have formal leadership or official doctrine or institutional structure. They're organized around presence rather than programs, relationship rather than rules, being rather than believing. People share stories of what's changing in their lives. They offer practical support for those facing consequences of choosing differently. They create spaces for honesty in a world that rewards performance. Most importantly, they practice seeing each other the way Jesus sees them. Not as problems to be solved or projects to be improved or resources to be utilized, but as beloved souls worthy of dignity, respect, and care simply because they exist. This practice of sacred seeing begins to leak out into daily life. The grocery store clerk gets seen as a person, not just a function. The homeless man on the corner gets acknowledged as a human being, not ignored as an inconvenience. The difficult coworker gets recognized as someone struggling with their own pain, not just an obstacle to productivity. Small shifts, barely noticeable changes in how people move through the world, but like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, they spread outward in ways that can't be tracked or measured or contained. The kingdom of God isn't coming in the future. It's here now, emerging in every moment when people choose love over fear, connection over isolation, presence over performance. It's as close as the next conversation, the next choice, the next breath taken with awareness that life itself is sacred. This is the message no one is ready to hear because it's too simple to commodify, too personal to politicize, too present to postpone. It doesn't require advanced degrees or special training or institutional authority. It just requires willingness to see with eyes that haven't been trained to extract value from everything they encounter. But that willingness, that simple shift in perception changes everything. Because when you start seeing the divine in everyone, you can't participate in systems that treat anyone as less than sacred. When you recognize your own worth beyond what you produce, you can't remain silent while others are told they don't matter. When you experience love that isn't conditional on performance, you can't help but offer that same love to a world starving for acceptance. The revolution is happening, not in the headlines or the history books or the places where revolutions are supposed to happen. It's happening in hearts that are learning to beat with compassion, in minds that are remembering how to think with wisdom, in hands that are choosing to build rather than tear down. And somewhere in Los Angeles, a man with calloused hands and eyes full of love continues walking the streets, continues sitting with the forgotten, continues offering the impossible gift of unconditional acceptance to anyone ready to receive it. The invitation remains open. The door is still unlocked. The choice is still ours. But the time for choosing is now. The morning sun breaks through the marine layer as Jesus walks through MacArthur Park, where families gather for weekend picnics while dealers conduct business in the shadows of palm trees. Children laugh on playground equipment while their parents scroll through phones, half present to the joy happening right in front of them. It's a perfect metaphor for modern existence. Beauty and brokenness occupying the same space, divided only by what we choose to see. He stops beside a young mother pushing her daughter on a swing. Isabella works 2 jobs to afford their 1-bedroom apartment, spends her evenings helping with homework she barely understands herself, falls asleep each night wondering if she's failing the most important job she'll ever have. Her daughter Maria squeals with delight as she flies higher, but Isabella's eyes are fixed on her phone screen responding to work emails that came in over the weekend. She's beautiful, Jesus says quietly, nodding toward the swinging child. Isabella looks up, defensive at first. Strangers who comment on her daughter usually want something, but something in this man's voice makes her actually see what he's seeing. Maria's face is radiant with pure joy, hair streaming behind her like a banner of freedom, completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of moving through space. She is, Isabella agrees, putting her phone in her pocket. For the first time in months, she gives her full attention to this moment, to her daughter's laughter, to the feeling of sunshine on her face, to the miracle of being alive on a Saturday morning with nowhere else she needs to be. They stand in comfortable silence, two adults watching a child rediscover the physics of joy. No profound words are exchanged, no life-changing revelations are spoken, but something shifts in the space between them. Isabella remembers what it feels like to be present. Maria feels her mother's complete attention for the first time in weeks. And in that shared awareness, the kingdom of God appears exactly where it always has been. In the love between a mother and child, waiting to be noticed. This is the pattern that emerges wherever Jesus walks in modern Los Angeles. Not dramatic interventions or supernatural spectacles, but the quiet restoration of presence in a world that has forgotten how to pay attention. The gentle remembering of what actually matters in lives that have been overwhelmed by what doesn't. From MacArthur Park, he might walk to Koreatown, where entrepreneurs work 18-hour days building businesses they hope will provide security for families they rarely see. The American dream pursued with such intensity that it becomes a nightmare of isolation and exhaustion. He'd find David Kim in his restaurant at 5 in the morning, prepping ingredients for another day of serving others while barely having time to feed his own soul. So there he is, still walking, still present, still offering what we've always needed but never quite known how to ask for. In a world desperate for influencers, he remains quietly influential. In a culture obsessed with platforms, he chooses pavement. In an age that worships metrics, he measures only by love. The question was never whether we'd crucify him again. We already have every time we choose systems over souls, profits over people, performance over presence. But here's the miracle hiding in plain sight. Love doesn't stay dead. Truth doesn't remain buried. And the kingdom of God keeps breaking through wherever human hearts remember they were made for more than what they've settled for. The message no one is ready to hear is the one we've always needed most. That you already belong. That your worth isn't for sale. That the revolution the world desperately needs begins with the quiet choice to see with eyes of love instead of fear. He's still walking through Los Angeles tonight. Still sitting with the forgotten. Still offering hope to the hopeless. The only question that remains is whether we'll finally stop performing long enough to recognize him when he calls our name.